Thank you for tuning in to the Peoplz and Dragons. If you enjoy the content we provide, then subscribe, like, and maybe join in on the action at www.pndrpg.com. Haven City, an ugly city. Episode 15. Recall. We fade into the instigator's remote lab in an unknown remote area. A wall of monitors displaying every experiment and staged event unfolding. Some failing, most amazingly successful. While the instigator is away, we see Zamina approach the largest display and zones in on R-Type's trial, saddened by his torment. We see R-Type filled with rage, going ham on the light, his glowing white arms a flashing blur as he lays strike upon strike into the light on standby, idle. R-Type X throws several strikes, then charges a bead of light in his palms, creating 11 supernovas, and plunges it into the light's Herculean chest, creating a nova of light the size of several districts. The smoke clears, and the light dims as R-Type finds his fist still pressed into the chest of the pale behemoth, its blank-faced, staring straight forward, above and over R-Type. Suddenly, life comes back into the light. It looks down at R-Type X, and in an instant, R-Type finds his face smashing into the light's fists. The instigator taunts R-Type through the light, then clotheslines R-Type, almost taking his head off, but takes him right off of his feet. The ground under R-Type shifts and slides from under him, bringing him back closer to the light as everything moves except for the light itself. Suddenly, separating their collision course, a giant glowing snake, the diameter of a school bus, radiant with black and purple chi flames, darts between and constricts the light. A menacing serpent lowers its glare to face level of the light and roars as 3 more larger serpents as large as buildings come slithering. Descending from the sky and landing beside R-Type, we see the glorious Nebu Beast King, Void Makai, upon his enormous Chi Beast dragon that places its wing in front of R-Type X as a barrier. Though tainted with the void life energy, R-Type X recognizes Makai's chi. The instigator is picking up a reading of Makai's abyssal contamination and calls for Kai Excalibur to hurry. Void Makai's colossal and heroic physique leaps from his dragon and says to R-Type, "Only I get to kill you," then calls off his serpents, triggering their chi flames to flicker out, dropping the light to its feet. Void Makai steps toward the light and assumes his exotic and confident fighting stance, when both R-Type and Makai feel an unsettling warmth engulf their bodies, when suddenly fire comes flying from nowhere, crashing into Makai like a jet plane on fire. Fire has Makai in his arms and flies him high into the sky, then unleashes an explosion from within himself, sending Makai twirling in the air on fire. Void Makai calls his dragon, but just before the dragon can take flight, the light holds its hand out, all fingers spread, and like a marionette, spreads the dragon limb by limb from foot to wing, A green vein bulges from behind the light's neck, and in an instant, the dragon's form is turned into water. Then, in a flash, is evaporated into steam, then frozen and formed into a 50-yard spike of ice that is then hurled like a javelin, impaling R-Type X dead center, the impact leaving a crater in the Dead Sea. Just then, the entire impaling and everything in that vicinity begins to rewind as time is brought to a halt and shifted by Gordon Gale. His lungs frail and on the verge of suffocation makes a sacrificial leap when he sees a massive and mysterious burst of emotion explode from R-Type. For Haven, Tempest digs deep into the reserves of his own willpower and pushes himself beyond his mutation's limits and begins absorbing time, his reach knowing no bounds. Focusing on the city of Haven, he begins pulling time from the hearts of cult members whose lifespans were of many and causing them to wither. Rasmussen falls to his knees, overtaken by the constant loss of life. His army, who have a fraction of his lifespan, begin collapsing under their heavy armor. Tempest gains so much power, he is not only able to encase himself in a temporal space lodged deep in the planet, allowing him to breathe, but is also aged backward into his prime. The instigator doesn't let his being impressed unfocus him from his experiment and immediately acts. The light breaks the entire Dead Sea apart so it can see Tempest. The whole coast is broken into fragments as hot magma can be seen deep under it all, glowing bright. The light causes magma to rise up, fast approaching Tempest, when suddenly the upheaval of magma is halted. The light turns and sees the Mage Brothers standing on the coast, miles away, chanting their poem. We cut to Mackay, falling slowly, keeping his eye on fire, zipping around him in circles, trying to figure out why his chi seems so different now, as if compounded with the sinister darkness. Fire was tasked with making sure nothing interfered with the final phase, and that's what he sought to do. Fire darts toward Mackay, whose regalia catches ablaze as fire approaches. Mackay prepares to strike when he realizes that he is hotter than the sun and will be obliterated if he strikes and decides to evade instead. Fire turns on the dime and fires several fireballs from his body, and those fireballs turn into more fireballs as Void Mackay strikes them down as they zone in on him. Fire keeps his distance, hurling endless balls of flame as some begin to hit Mackay, scorching his resilient Nibu flesh. Void Mackay begins to cough up blood and notices blood dripping from his nose. Then he's hit by a large ball of fire. He realizes he is surrounded by flaming spheres, all emitting lethally toxic fumes. Fire smiles and causes all of the floating fireballs around him to collide and successfully imprison Void Mackay in a large mass of scorching hot flames. Then, with the use of his suit, blasts and douses the flames with unnatural and aberrant fumes, forming a ball of death. A massive chi beast serpent manifests by fire mid-air and bites at him, but he evades and incinerates the chi beast serpent when another comes and swallows him whole. That's when we see the ball of death erupt and explode, and from the center, we see Void Mackay unleashing his power in his now empowered state. Engulfed in shadowy purple chi flames, forming draconic armor and features, unscathed and unharmed by the toxic fire, the toxic impurities are sterilized by the dark life forces circulating through Mackay's chakras. Fire explodes from out of the serpent and turns to see Makai, but turns right into a kick, rocking Fire explodes from out of the serpent and turns to look for Makai, but turns right into a kick, rocking Fire and sending a destructive surge through his skull, blowing the flames out. Makai's knee strike, flying over him in passing, follows it up with a dozen of bone-breaking kicks within seconds, practically breaking Fire into pieces, sending waves of chi bursting through his body with every strike, causing chunks and components to fly off of his armor. Void Makai lands one final kick, sending Kai Excalibur flying into the fragmented fissures below. Then heads to aid R-Type X from the light. The light turns to the Mage brothers, the old Walton and his brother Monty, a fraction of his age. The light warps both of their heads in front of it and throws each of its fists into both, crushing their faces in like pumpkins. Then within fractions of a second, their heads are warped back onto their necks, where they collapse, dying instantly. The light then causes an explosion of magma and attempts to melt Tempest from within his temporal shield. R-Type snaps out of his trance, his eyes glowing the same color as the aura of natural energy building around him. His Libra amping up, calling into recollection of every experience he ever had. Zamina's voice begins to echo through his head, pleading that he suppresses his power. R-Type X, astonished by her message, hesitates. The instigator instantly severs her connection from the tank. The light begins to approach R-Type X, but is immediately blasted by hundreds of chi beams as Void Makai rushes in, surrounded in a river of flames pouring from his roaring mouth. Just before he reaches him, a sinister green-lit Kai Excalibur collides into him again like a shooting star, shattering Makai's empowered armor and all of Makai's ribs. Fire then blasts Makai as Makai spews chi flame at Fire, both twirling and fighting mid-flight. The light reaches his hand out and erases them both, along with every serpent summoned onto the battlefield, then turns back to the glowing R-Type and begins walking over to torment him. We cut to Rezanok plummeting from the sky and is brought back to consciousness when he smashes right into a neon sign. Using the wind to slow his fall, Rez lands on his feet and is immediately... Using the wind to slow his fall, Rezanok lands on his feet and is immediately attacked by hordes of lunatics. A raving madman rushes from behind, but Rez turns around with an elbow, then blasts him with a wave of fire, blowing him back. More approach and are struck down by Rezanok's fire clones. Rezanok looks around trying to get his equilibrium back when he notices a vehicle approaching slowly while being hounded by lunatics. It pulls up to Rez and the passenger window rolls down. Rez can see, peering out to him, lovely, glowing lavender and gold eyes. A young woman's voice emerges. "Are you Rezanok?" Rezanok backs away from the shady vehicle as he and his clones prepare themselves, as he trusts no one in these chaotic streets. All three doors open and the colossal Dravko Maz gets out from the driver's side, Namke I out from the passenger, and Six gets out from the back and leans on the vehicle, setting his golden eyes on Rezanok. Nam begins to discuss with the others how she wants first, but Drav disagrees and they both begin to debate on who takes Rez out. Rezanok hears them and is slightly amused that they think They can take him on. Rez stretches. Nam stops arguing with Drav and decides to just engage Rez, power walking forward, and starts throwing a flurry of sharp punches, all evaded by Rez, nimble on his toes, when Drav comes crashing over, swinging and stomping with deceptive precision. The ground shakes, causing Rez to lose his footing as Nam comes over top with a crescent kick, which is blocked by Rez's fire clone, in turn triggering a flash of intense emotion to stir within Nam. Rez instantly picks up on this, spotting a microscopic flake of flesh burning from upon her arm. Rez ducks under Dravko Maz's swing and knees Nam, but she blocks it and throws a two-piece, rocking Rez's face as he backs up into Drav, who hammer fists him through a window. Nam Ki goes to leap through after him, but as she jumps through, Rez was already on his way out, propelling himself fist first into Nam's stomach, taking her into a vehicle. He then throws a reckless flurry of punches, all blocked by Nam's wrists effortlessly. She captures his last fist and pulls his arm down into a chin-crushing knee strike, then several swift strikes to his chest, her fighting style unlike anything he's ever seen before. He notices her emotions and correlates it to her competence. She kicks Rez into Dravko's fist, but Rez deflects it with a flaming energy clone's body and takes the brunt of the blow. Rez envelops his arm in blazing energy and shoves the brute backward off of his feet several yards. Drav is amused by his power and steps back as Six steps in and draws two cards, when suddenly Rez energy dashes forward, leaving a trail of fire with his hand out, grabs Six's mouth and ignites his hand with an eruption of flame and wind that floods Six's mouth and skull cavity, blowing it apart, killing him instantly, as his cards fly every which way. Rezanok, acting on pure instincts, ignoring all morals, doesn't even realize how out of character this is, immediately turns to see Nam's reaction. Rezanok, acting off of pure instincts, ignoring all morals, doesn't even realize how out of character this is for him and immediately turns to see Nam's reaction. His desire to see her emotional mutation is overriding his value for life once again. Nam's eyes widen at the death of her newfound ally and is paralyzed by shock and then followed up by a wave of anger. We see Deftude watching from afar. He removes his mask in awe at Rez's killer instincts. Drav charges Rezanok and hawks up a glob of acid toward him, but Rez tosses up Six's headless body to catch it all, and then summons a cyclone that captures all of the body's remnants and acid and purposely tosses it at Nam's feet. Nam's arms are set ablaze with golden nuclear flame, causing a corona of golden fire to rage around her. The fire lights up Rez's eyes as he stays fixated on her while avoiding Drav's wild and dangerous swings. Rez ducks and unleashes a gust of fiery wind that swallows Drav, however, doesn't even faze him as the flames die upon his durable scales. Drav pushes through it and uppercuts Rez, unhinging his jaw, sending him flying into the air onto a vehicle. Before Rez could even get up, Nam Ki comes crashing down, fist and knee first, crushing Rez down the center of the vehicle all the way through it and into the street, creating a crater. Rez's clothes ablaze as nuclear embers devour his clothes and flesh. Rezanok pushes out several 100-mile-per-hour winds from his body that extinguish the flames and pushes Nam off and straight into the air. Drav runs up and grabs both ends of the vehicle Rez is embedded in and folds them in on Rez, trapping him. that is then tossed into a wall, then smashed again by a charging draft. Rez is crushed and takes extraordinary bodily damage and fizzles away, revealing it was just a clone, as we see Rez and Nam fighting in mid-air, levitating by the force of their own strikes and gusts of Rez's wind. Rez sees the anger in her eyes, and Nam sees the sudden bloodlust in Rez's as she kicks in his ribs. Though blocked by his arm, the force smashes through his arm, sending him into a group of innocent civilians. Rez hops up immediately, looking incredibly disturbed and unlike himself, blasts one of the civilians, setting them ablaze as they run down the street on flames till dying of their wounds. Rez does so to incite more rage in Nam, and it works, as she rushes him with crazy speed and unleashes hundreds of flaming kicks that rip into Rez and even the surrounding civilians, killing them without Nam really realizing it. Her tantrum has gotten so out of hand that she is blinded by not only rage, but by the golden tears pouring from her eyes. Rez takes more damage, his body scorched and his detached jaw swinging. Drav tackles him from the side and runs him straight through a building wall. Drav begins throwing wild haymakers while over top of Rez, whose fire barrier takes the brunt of the force until his massive claws break through it. But by then, Rez has slipped from under him and backs up a bit, trying to get better positioning as Drav comes power walking, cracking his knuckles and laughing as if just getting started. Nam approaching from another angle, throwing vehicles out of the way. Rez summons one perfect fire clone beside him, then engulfs himself in flames, and has his clone walk directly into himself, causing a wave of energetic flames to blow out. A battered, yet sturdy and chiseled Rezanok stands, his body coated in red energy with miniature white flames decorating his shoulders. Rezanok isn't even thinking about Nam anymore and wants to see what Drav's mutation is all about. A very disturbed Rezanok that we've never seen before begins to smile like a fiend. He wants to see what was inside of Drav Komas. Rezanok lunges toward Drav as Drav lunges toward him. Rav swings. Rez dips under and throws a fistful of white fire that penetrates and obliterates Drav's armor. But Rez's fist fractures into pieces from the impact of it hitting his scales. Rezanok briefly succumbs to the pain and loses his footing a bit when Drav's tail creeps up on Rezanok's leg, constricts it, snaps it in half, followed by a disastrous clobbering hook, but his arm is suddenly captured by the tower destroyer Shif-Gigma, a massive dog-faced demon of immense strength summoned behind Drav. We cut to Nam Ki, wielding Six's cards in her hand. Deathtude has been secretly training Nam with Six's cards and psyche-sealing power techniques, enabling her to separate, capture, and bind the manifestations of her emotions. She seems to have calmed down and tells Drav to do the same because Deathtude wants him alive. Drav yanks his fist away from the Shif-Gigma, but constricts Rez's leg tighter, breaking it in another spot. Drav goes to finish Rez with a chop to the neck, but just as Rez takes it to the neck, a fiery wind clone of Rezanok dashes out with a lunging strike to Drav, but is blocked by Nam's glowing hands, who then takes Rez's hands and spins his whole body horizontally and throws a flaming punch that he evades as he dissipates into wind, then reforms into his glowing red and white flame state. Drav smacks Rez, but Rez grabs and holds onto Drav's arm, then causes himself to explode, causing a massive explosion of fiery red and white flames, causing all the glass on every window of the block to shatter. Drav, still standing and unfazed, searches through the smoke, looking for Rezanok, and he finds him fixated on Drav's healing factor. Rez thinks to himself, of course, an over-mutated physiology able to sustain form with a healing factor. Drav goes to strike Rez, but Rez manipulates the wind, sending the entire cloud of thick smoke funneling up into his snout, filling his lungs, suffocating and briefly disabling Drafko Maz. Nam hits Rez with a series of kicks, then hooks her leg around his head, swinging him into Drav, who exhales the entire smog along with acid effortlessly, in time to then clothesline Rezanok, knocking him clear out of his energy form and doing several flips before hitting the concrete. Rez starts crawling slowly, but is then kicked into a vehicle. We cut to Drav and Nam standing over an unconscious Rez.
District 9, burgers, now.
Nam looks up at Drav and rolls her eyes and picks up Rezanok. We cut to the food register of one of District 9's fast food joints that was still open and out of the chaotic areas. A clerk, standing at the counter with headphones on, looks up and pulls them out slowly when she sees a massive and burnt up Drafko Maz walking in with Six's decapitated body draped over his shoulder, dripping blood across the freshly mopped tile, followed by Nam, covered in blood and burn marks, and over her shoulder, unconscious Knock. The clerk watches speechless, saying not a word as Drav plops Six's body onto the counter, a splash of blood getting on the clerk's shoes. She then watches as Drav breaks through the entire counter and rakes all the burgers into a sack. He looks at Nam as she points to a batch of fresh hot nom-noms, bite-sized appetizers with every 1 in 100 having a nuclear kick to it. Drav grabs a bag with his tail and then the two exit. We see Nam and Drav driving in the car back to the pier. Nam's stained face looking in the rearview mirror at Drav, crammed in the back with Rez and Six. They pull up to the pier. At the top of the steps, we see Deftude donning his black mask, waiting. He then looks over to the direction of the light, who can be seen further down the coast, then beckons them to enter the wharf. We cut to Nam and Drav carrying Rez, enter the wharf and finds Deftude standing before a deck of blank cards. Nam knows what this means and walks over to them. Deftude hands her the blank card and tells her to do it how he taught it. This was Nam's second attempt at creating a space to inhabit that was hidden in her consciousness. First time she tried, she was temporarily locked out of body, which led to some emotional ramifications. However, this time, Nam completes the ritual successfully and manifests a gateway into a pocket dimension of Nam's consciousness as Deftude, Drav, and the defeated Rez enter through, vanishing from Haven entirely, just in the nick of time. We cut to the instigator looking into the tank with anticipation. The light approaching R-Type X, who still remains conflicted over unleashing himself using the energy of the world. When suddenly, the light stops and looks over his shoulder, where we see a sliver of the abyss opening up into the material realm. A fragment of Void Makai still remaining and slightly resistant to the power of full erasure. The instigator's eyes sharpen as he watches what he knows to be the contamination of the tank getting ready to get out of hand. We see Void Makai slowly coming into form. Several uncounted aliens enter into the lab. Zamina steps aside. The uncounted tell the instigator it's time. The instigator's heart is filled with malice towards the uncounted, rushing his experiment to complete a sale when so close to his own personal breakthroughs. If it weren't for their access to an artificial planet, he would have long since disposed of them. But the creation of a G-type, far beyond what the Uncount or himself can imagine, is what's more important. The Instigator has a plan, and complies with the Uncount to erase and reset the cycle. The Instigator glares at Zamina with hatred for her hand in the interference of R-Type's cultivation. He then presses the button. The light begins to glow, a blinding, bright, white light. The entire planet begins to shake as the light puts its hands into the sky and unleashes an erasing wave of starlight that completely vaporizes R-Type X, Tempest, the remnants of Makai, and everything else. The entire planet is swallowed up by the light, and everything is completely erased, leaving nothing but the digital spherical wireframe of the planet. The light lowers its hand and looks around at nothingness in space. The Instigator reads the vitals of the tank, showing 92% of it is clear, with the remaining portion corrupted by the abyss, which is exponentially more than the last cycle. The Instigator commands Zamina to check for traces of Deathtude, but she finds nothing. The Instigator then calls the light back to the station, but just then, an explosion of blue energy erupts mid-space, and emerging from it we see a naked R-Type X, his arms glowing white and his forehead glowing from his Libra operating at full capacity. R-Type X has ascended far past his creator's potential and has become an embodiment of all the energies that were displaced during the erasure, and has achieved Kamikata, an amped state of mind and body, and more importantly, Libra. The light reaches its hand out and warps R-Type in front of him, but it is read by Libra, and as soon as R-Type appears, he does so with a blow to the light's body that bores a hole through the light, sending R-Type X directly through its colossal 8-foot frame. The light turns around with the fist of erasing starlight, but is met by a thunderous flying uppercut that lands so true that the light's head is ripped from its body, but not before being engulfed in a masked tower of void energy. All around the light, mirrors manifest, showing its reflection, until a menacing apparition of Iblis R-Type X appears in them and steps through each of the 9 mirrors simultaneously. They then each lunge toward and through the light, ripping its energy self into several pieces, followed by a massive Iblis explosion that cracks and destroys the entire tower, leaving a headless and lifeless light floating in space. The Instigator, in shock, but with a smile on his face, watches R-Type's ascendance. The light's controls are going haywire, the link unresponsive, and its vitals showing the dark necrotic Iblis energy devouring the Takena that brought life to the Instigator's one-of-a-kind, metaphysical manipulating Takena golem. The Uncount aliens look astonished by R-Type's display of power. Zamina runs up to the screen. She is worried for R-Type now that he is proven to be a G-type unlike anything they've ever created. R-Type X then turns his head as he feels their energy further out in the depths of space. R-Type X then turns his head as he feels their energy further out in the depths of space inside their hidden station and begins to dart toward them. The Instigator is so amazed at their creation that he doesn't realize the trouble they are in as R-Type fast approaches. Suddenly, R-Type's face explodes with monstrous tentacles and begins to deform and mutate. His neck, chest, and back break open. His bones begin to get mushy as his stomach turns inside out and his legs fold inward, breaking and twisting. The instigator turns to see that the Uncown has hit the kill switch, inducing mass mutation on R-Type X, turning him into an abomination. The Uncown informed the instigator that they already chose the G-Type from this cycle, and to clean up the mess. They then instruct the instigator and Zamina to cease the improvement on Libra and to focus all their resources on G1A12, also known as Anarchy, for the next cycle. The small, little green Uncown alien exits the lab, showing no remorse for the instigator's hard work being erased. The instigator stares at the screen, watching R-Type slowly die and suffocate within himself. Zamina walks over and incinerates the remainder of the tank, putting R-Type out of his misery. Saying nothing, the instigator begins turning dials and pressing buttons, preparing the artificial planet for the next cycle. He releases the light, his prized Takena golem, from his ship's controls, sending it drifting into space, dead and cold. He then replaces Omega Supreme's DNA with Kai Excalibur's DNA and begins the process of birthing a new golem. He then reloads the landscape, reestablishing all of the continents and landforms, followed by its structures and invisible barriers around the planet, hiding the many satellite outposts orbiting the planet. We cut to Zamina, operating giant aircrafts that place every G-born in their rightful place. G-born were planted and grown like seeds. Every aspect of them is code and can be transferred to and from the lab using small devices. The same device Timbrus stole from the Survey traders who stole it from the instigator himself. These devices store experience, consciousness, and potential to be improved with continued progress. The G-born have been improved by the investigator, Deftude, and Zamina over a course of several life cycles, and they get better and better results when they make tweaks to the code and the artificial planet. We see every G-born clone being placed, deactivated, and with dormant mutations. The instigator tweaks the Gamma event, changing it from an airborne explosion that reigns over the city back to a massive Gamma-filled rock called Grinfall, set to crash into the city, awakening their dormant mutations. The instigator decides not to use chaos as a means to bring out the G-born's full potential, but instead survival, to supplement the Uncown's desire to focus on Anarchy 12 this coming cycle. So he switches the consciousness settings of the tank from the anti-mutant philosophy module and onto a module that will provide a different dilemma by implementing 3 major scientifically sound belief systems of how gamma mutation exists. The instigator makes adjustments to a setting and pulls a lever as promised, giving Anarchy 12 and his android empire dominion over Haven in place of a governor. However, Anarchy 12's memory of everything is erased, but is planted with a small device that will recollect his memories when triggered by the instigator. He plants Kai Excalibur with the same device that will flood his mind with memory when it comes time to protect any of the instigator's 3 daughters of the G2 project from harm or from getting too close to each other, which will cause mass mutation and discord. The instigator accelerates Rose, Amelia, and Serenity to the age of 13 and makes them susceptible to the influence they grow up around. With Rose growing up on a volcanic island with Kai, Serenity out in Nibu, and Amelia under Tempest in the Gate, they will be just far enough to become their own person, though they are all clones of the original G2, Saoirse. The instigator was commanded to avoid using any more resources on the R-Type X in the coming cycle. He gazes over at Zamina and thinks to himself that perhaps it's wise to put the experiment on hold, being that it's been tampered and tainted with by Zamina. During the first few cycles, Zamina was instructed to dive into the tank as a Raylagarian girl in order to grow love within R-Type X, as love is always a great motivator for power. Deftude and the Instigator voted against this after Zamina grew to love R-Type X. She has since been placed in charge of just monitoring him closely. The Instigator commands Zamina to store him under Atlet in the nursery, which is a containment lair where the Instigator keeps the G-types that he wants to continue working on later. It is overlooked by another reality-bending Takena golem called the Mother, and those who wander too close to the site are sent spiraling into a never-ending illusion, working in tandem with the tank's legendary hard light technology, driving the victim insane. Zamina looks relieved that R-Type X will be left alone finally, until the Instigator forbids her from ever entering the tank again. Zamina doesn't even bother to fight back as she knew this was coming, and she leaves the lab and heads to her quarters. The Instigator watches, then turns to R-Type's coding, and to spite her romance with R-Type, he dials back his age, turning him into a 12-year-old child. He then separates his Libra and stores it safely with the Mother. We cut to the Instigator preparing for a weapons deal that's getting ready to take place. The weapon in this scenario being the hand-selected G-type of the previous cycle. The Uncount had a lucrative business, and it was all thanks to the Instigator for producing such G-types. The Instigator and 3 Uncount can be seen standing on the bridge of their ship with armed guards as a smaller ship approaches. The dealing of G-types was essentially slavery, but in the majority of the star systems this was legal. However, the methods used to create these G-types is what's illegal, and so securing deals was stressful as it was essentially giving away their location. The Uncount, unbeknownst to the buyer, would send a Takena leech into their heads that would erase from their memory the location. Between that, armed guards, and a master lich, dealings have always run smoothly. It was often other mutologists purchasing G-types for their own experiments, or one of the 2 governing factions purchasing super soldiers for their armies. The small ship enters the hangar and out walks a balding, mature gentleman in casual attire, escorted by a mercenary. The man went by the name of Doug and was here to purchase the G-type that he was promised. The Instigator's men bring out Shade, adorned in a green-fitting battle armor, and appears to be a mindless thrall. G-types that are chosen and sold have their souls taken and become programmable by their purchaser. Doug looks him up and down and into Shade's lifeless eyes staring into space. He asks to see the teleportation in action. Shade teleports a few times and Doug is pleased and puts the credits on the table. The Instigator looks at Doug and Doug at him. The Instigator tells Doug that the last cycle produced a great few. Doug looks at the Uncount, wondering why he wasn't told about this, but the Uncount interrupts and assures Shade was the best option. Doug takes Shade and they depart. Later that night, we see Zamina in her quarters in a chair, getting ready to subconsciously dive back into the tank to visit R-Type X once again, despite being told not to. She places the nodes on her temples and closes her eyes to prepare to greet R-Type X, but is instead hurled into a pit of broiling Takena soul fire 10 times hotter than flames, but burns at a fraction of the rate of normal fire. Zamina, in agony, tries to exit, but the pain is too surreal and she can't even form thoughts. We cut to the Instigator, who appears behind Zamina's real body, unconscious and jacked into the system he planted. He takes the nodes off of her temple and leaves her body to rot and her consciousness to endlessly burn. The instigator heads back to his lab, and we see him cycling through a database of faces Deathtude has stored, trying to find a match with the Doug person who seemed oddly familiar. Then boom, a dozen matches come up. The instigator discovers that Doug has been at more than half of the Mutology congregations. Suddenly, the instigator hears a massive explosion from within the ship. He pulls up a monitor and sees space pirates likely here for his bounty, blasting through the hull and killing the crew and Uncow, just as he expected. Doug was an informant. The instigator was already in the process of locking down the tank's controls with a special key, setting his escape ship on a course to the artificial planet, then blasting the tank off into endless space to flee with him and all of his work on it. But just before being able to send the tank into blastoff, his pursuers arrive at his door, and he has to escape this second. A sword of light slices and dices up the door to the lab, and walking through it, we see a humanoid wolf in all red space armor wielding dual blades made of starlight. He looks around for the instigator. Behind him, a light, limber, slim, and graceful 8-foot-tall woman with white porcelain skin, adorned in an old Victorian dress, walks in. Behind her, dozens of space pirates. She fixes her 8 small, spider-like eyes on the instigator's monitors, all locked down, and then over to the massive window with a great view of the planet tank, where they see the instigator's ship fleeing toward it. The Wolfman identifies the ship as their bounty target and signals to the others to give chase. He tells the woman with the 8 eyes that her info is always on point and drinks are on him next time. We see a close-up of the woman's 8 eyes staring at the planet. We cut to the instigator flying his ship toward the planet tank and prepares to send his ship, which is an extension of himself, deep into the planet as to keep it hidden and out of reach of Grinfall, which is set to hit the following day. The instigator realizes the dangers of heading into the tank unprepared, but rather lead his pursuers into the tank to kill them there than to risk destroying his lab. As the instigator enters the atmosphere, his ship is immediately shot down by stealth ships so advanced his own ship couldn't detect them. Taking heavy damage, his ship begins spiraling into Haven, but not just any Haven. This was Anarchy's New World Haven, and the instigator was surprised to see how fast it has grown in just the past several hours of the cycle being launched, and begins to contemplate if giving Anarchy the city was another terrible idea requested by the Uncown, who know nothing of these G-types' potential. We cut to Becky Bank Branch and see civilians waiting in line being serviced by android clerks. We see a man leaving the counter after just making a large withdrawal of bizquirks when 5 robbers bust into the bank with high-powered black market weaponry. Time to give credit where credit's due. Line 'em up and bring me your sticks. Scared civilians begin lining up, dumping their credits onto the robbers' sticks, when a brave civilian jumps out and decides to make a break for it, but is immediately blasted with slime that sends him into a wall and begins suffocating him. You fall out of line, you fall in some slime. And you're out of time. Yeah. Suddenly, all of their guns are yanked from their possession and pulled into a magnetic field floating above Chronicle and several other gate agents at the entrance. Chronicle smirks and tells the goon that he has to work on his taglines. A girl on a red energy board zooms by with A girl on a red energy board zooms by the slimed captive, cutting it open and freeing the victim as they gasp for air. A red, energetic boomerang makes its rounds around the bank, breaking the faces of every goon it hits before falling back into the hands of Energy Cap. Enjoying being a hero in an ugly city, Chronicle and the others hear the sound of a ship spiraling toward the city and go outside to see what it is when they witness the instigator's ship crash right into the building across the street as the impact levels entire blocks of buildings. Chronicle looks around and contacts the Gate Center to tell Tempest, who has been unreachable for the entirety of the cycle, but to them just feels like a morning. An elite android fleet straight from Sector 12 arrives as wanderer androids begin to warp onto the scene. Chronicle can't reach Tempest and makes a judgment call to retreat. The city was run by androids, and for the Gate Center, it was best to avoid any altercations with them. We cut to the instigator, slightly shaken and disoriented, reaching for the latch to exit his ship, but it is ripped off the hinges by a B-2 brawler who then grabs the instigator out and tosses him in front of the Wanderer, who scans him. The instigator pulls out a deja vu device to trigger memories inside of Anarchy's head, but before activating it, an orb fires a tractor beam at him, paralyzing his fingers, then his entire body, as he is then bound and thrown into a ship, headed towards Sector 12. We cut to Timbers, who was woken up from his deep sleep by his loud TV, breaking news of a mysterious ship crashing near the bank. He rubs his eyes and turns to the mysterious device glowing beside him. Timbers remembers everything that happened, and for some reason has a strange memory of a Raylagarian woman telling him to find R-Type X, but he doesn't understand what it means. He's never been to the Atlas District, and he doesn't know what the fucking R-Type X is. He gets up out of his bed and runs over to the window and opens the drapes, revealing a flourishing android-driven Haven City, the New World City. We see Tempest in a helicopter hovering above Haven's coastal region. The sea is restored. Tempest senses a temporal anomaly in the area and has spent all morning searching for it, and has finally found it nestled within the sea floor. He retrieves it and opens it up. He is treated to a time-frozen sound wave that unveils Tempest's last words from the last cycle. It enlightens Tempest with the knowledge that this is an endless cycle of soul farming and slavery by the Survey Day cult, who are extremely dangerous. The temporal anomaly fades within Tempest's hands. Tempest looks up into the air as his copter takes him back to the center. Thanks for watching Peoplz and Dragons, the interactive RPG game show. I encourage everyone to jump into our comment section to participate in the lore contests, as well as visit our Patreon page to learn what perks come with your support for our machine. Peace.